Hello, my friends. My name is Gerdes, just a professor trying to help you understand what's going on in Ukraine. And by extension, I'm trying to understand how to unlock political support here in the United States. About a week ago, I put out this poll and you couldn't see the poll. And I asked, please don't answer unless you are in this category or that category or the other. And people were like, oh, I really wanted to answer, but I'm really interested. I'm going to show you what the polling results were. But before I do that, let me preface with this. So I spend a lot of my time looking at Russian propaganda, Russian misinformation, that sort of thing. And it struck me that, so here's Solyov talking about how we are the warriors of light. Like there is this garb of Orthodox Christianity that Russia has taken upon itself to show that Russia is approved by God and it's the only country on earth that can save the world, and the West is all decadent and evil and you're bad. And so, but they're talking traditional value kind of language, but they're saying it in a way that means something different than what American conservatives think. But American conservatives are kind of the audience because they're using the same word meaning different things. And I think that's part of what's going on, because the real pushback that they're getting with unlocking aid for Ukraine are mostly Republicans. And within that, I think evangelicals are kind of the black sheep of the black sheep here. And I'm an evangelical Christian conservative, right? If you've listened to me for any period of time, you know I'm a conservative. I'm a Reagan conservative. So I hear the nuances between the two, and I'm putting the dots together. And so that caused me to put out this political poll on my platform. Now, I fully recognize, now this was the first poll that I put out. And I fully recognize that this is not a average audience. This is an audience of people that listen to me that are pro-Ukraine. But even with that, I still had a sample of 3,800 votes. And so my first question was, how do you perceive, and I did this hurry up where I didn't even get the word perceive correct. I get that. Okay, how do you perceive Russia and American Republicans? So the choices were, it was basically a Likert scale 1 to 5, where you have extremes and you have moderate and then you have the center. Okay, so completely opposite. So again, we're looking at how Russia talks about itself and how American Republicans are. Are they the same or are they pretty different? Completely opposite. Mostly different. Remember, you have ex-Soviets versus Judeo-Christian conservatives, and they were on very different pages. The Judeo-Christian conservative type would be individual values and free markets and that kind of thing. Ex-Soviet would have been community, communal, or force from the authoritarian center. They were just on very different bases. I don't know, no opinion, perfectly fair, or mostly the same because both are pushing traditional values, or they're completely aligned with each other. Like they're so much on the same page, they're indistinguishable. Now, I put this out just out of curiosity, thinking, I think what Solyov is talking about and what American conservatives think that he's saying are actually two very different things. And so here's my first stab at it. Okay, so I got completely opposite at 9%, mostly different at 21%. That's 30% total, 10% in the middle, that's 40. So you have 60% over here, 30 to 60. So there's a very lopsided view that basically conservative Republican types are essentially the same as Russians. They're not. There's a big difference. And I was like, okay, so I get it. My audience tends to lean pretty heavily to the left. Maybe I can unpack that and see what was, if demographically it comes out differently. So that's when I put out this with 1 of 4. Excuse me, something in my throat. Please answer only one of the 4 polls. If you identify as political left, answer this one. How do you perceive Russia and the American Republicans? And then I had number 2, if you answer as a centrist. Number 3 was if you identify as a right, Trump, MAGA, that's the other one. And then if you, like me, identify as political right, as an old school conservative, but not Trump, MAGA. So it was really interesting to see how it broke down. So if you're old school conservative, you saw the same question as before, but now we're breaking it out into demographics to see how political affiliation, and not just left, right, and center, but left, center, and MAGA right or old school conservative right. So old school conservatives 23 and 30%. Here you had 53% that saw it as complete opposite. Now remember, it was only 30% here in this one. So breaking it out, you saw the trend line difference. So 53% saw it as opposite. Don't worry about the 8% opinion here. And then you had a minority at 39% that saw it as completely the same or somewhat the same. So I thought that's really interesting. We do make these distinctions. People like me that are the Reagan conservative types, I don't see what Solioff is saying when he's talking about traditional values. I see that as very different than what I see. So an example that I would give, for example, when Bishop Kirill is talking about being pro-life, right? He's talking about being pro-life, not because like your average churchgoer down the street who might be pro-life, who is thinking like that child has a right to exist just like you or I do, and that's why I'm pro-life. Not like that, but because he's trying to solve the demographic crisis in Russia, and he wants new soldiers 20 years from now. That's the way he explained what he means of why he's pro-life. So that's very different at its root or at its foundation. And I think that's a very important key here. And again, I had 892 votes, and these are all people that are interested in what's going on in Ukraine. Okay, so here, next one. Now, does it shift between old school conservative and Trump MAGA conservatives? And you see it does shift. There's actually a smaller group that sees that it's opposite at only, if remember, the first one was 53%. This is only 36%. And then it's much higher that agree, about 50% agree that it's actually the same. And so that's interesting. So it's interesting that the people that are more MAGA find it, and with a much higher percentage here, completely aligned is the highest thing here, where over here, mostly different is the highest over here. So completely aligned with each other. And this is MAGA that thinks that they're onto something. So I'm onto this thought that if you could disabuse evangelicals, now I know most of you don't care about evangelicals. Let's say you don't. Just for political purpose, if you could convince evangelicals that what Russia is saying about traditional values is not the same as what you're saying, I think you change the way that they interact with Russia-Ukraine war. I mean, I think that's really how it'll work. Let me show you the rest of the results first. Okay, so here we go. How do you perceive Russia and Republicans? Again, this is the political center, and the center, again, you're going to see that it's going to be less up on top. So it went from 53 to 36. Now that's down to 29 that views it as opposite. And you see 63% that views it as essentially the same. Okay, so that's pretty telling as well. And then when you get to the left, now the left's going to see the right askance already. And then when you get to the left, I mean, it's even smaller. So political left is 19% that completely or mostly see it as opposite, and then it's going to be a whopping 75%. But it doesn't matter for the left. It matters for the right, because the left is already supporting Ukraine by and large. What really matters is what happens here. The difference between how you break out old school conservative and how you break out MAGA, which tends to believe the repeaters, the Tucker Carlson, Trump, and whatever else, that's saying the Russian kind of talking pieces. And if you could disabuse them of that, I think you make a difference. Now, there's another poll that is related to that I put out a few days after that. I said, okay, I'll reveal yesterday's poll as promised, and I'm doing that now. Now, if you are not a described evangelical Christian, please answer this poll. If you are not, and so people were like, oh man, I want to know the answer to this one as well. Okay, so I'm asking not evangelicals, anyone who does not consider themselves that way. If you understood that Russian theology and philosophy that drove them to support traditional values was unbiblical or opposed to the Bible as you understand it, you would be, and much less supportive of Russia, slightly no opinion, slightly more, much more supportive. And then there was another one related to that, that was this. I'm asking the same thing. Poll just to self-identified evangelicals. Same question. If you understand that Russia theology and philosophy that drove them to support traditional values was unbiblical. Now, if you're an evangelical and you look at this, you go, okay, 32 and 4, that's 36% are much less supportive of Russia because of that. And then the difference was 7% that would be more. And now there's going to be a large that don't support anyway because of it. So look at it. because of who I'm asking. I'm asking people that are already here. But I think that there's something really about this that's legitimate. Like self-identified evangelicals, look at the huge difference in support, 7 to 36%. It's a five-fold multiple going the other direction. Yeah, if they understood that what Russia's talking when they're talking about traditional values is not the same base as where they are. So I think there's three ways that you can dislodge evangelical. Oh, by the way, here's the other one. The other one was even those that are not self-identified evangelicals are 15 to 2. So even there's an effect, but still, I mean, there's something really significant about if you can communicate to self-described evangelicals. So you have a friend or family member who's a Trump, MAGA kind of something, and they are supporting Russia because they think that Russia is, supporting these traditional values because they hear that kind of thing repeated by someone like Tucker Carlson, and we can provide evidence that no, this is not the same basis. I think we actually have something. Now, this is where I'm going to ask you for some help. What evidence can you show me that what Russia is saying when they're talking about traditional morality is not what your neighbor down the street who goes to church on Sunday morning religiously is thinking? Like, what evidence can you help me with that we can do that? Now, the first is gathering evidence. The second is then to get it into hands of somebody who can actually project that out and make a difference. But I think we're on to something here. And that's what the polling was about. So as I promised, I'm showing you what the polls were. And I think there's something here. Again, these polls, this is not a average sample of the across of the general population, but I think there's still a legitimate effect here. And I think if we can marshal some evidence that, okay, so there's three ways that I think that we can actually make a dent in how we change people's minds, particularly conservative minds, because liberal minds don't have to change on like the issue of supporting Ukraine. They're already there. Particularly conservatives who are MAGA, and those tend to be pretty heavily evangelical. So how to change their minds? One, if you can show you're winning, that changes everybody's mind, and that really helps. That's a hard one. The second one, if you Jason J. Smart talked about this in the Kiev Post article, if you can show Russian persecution of evangelicals or Christians within Ukraine, that can have a significant shifting effect as well. Or, and this is my thesis, is that if you can show that they're really very different things, and American evangelicals see this as almost what Russia's doing as almost cult-like, and it kind of is like this, God only approves of Russia and everybody else is evil. If you can show it that, I think they'll have an allergic reaction to that to the degree that they understand it, and we can actually see some movement. Okay. I need your help now. I need you to feed me anything that you can that shows me the difference between where Russia is and why they're saying their traditional values or their Christianity. And I'm not trying to attack the Russian Orthodox Church, but I think that the Putin regime has put on this cloak of this mantle of being supported by this, and we are the only force of God on earth, that kind of thing. I think we need to amplify that. If you can feed it to me, I'd appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to me. Tell me what you think in the comments, and whatever links or whatever you can provide, I greatly appreciate it. If you're going to provide a link, just because links sometimes disappear, tell me the title and where it came from as well. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.